Det har ju faktiskt handlat ganska mycket om framtiden här under dagen. Vi hade det, tycker jag, väldigt intressanta samtalet om digitaliseringen och scenkonsten under förmiddagen precis före lunch, där någon av deltagarna sa det att det finns inget område i samhället som är mindre anpassat för delaktighet än kulturen. Det var ganska provocerande sagt. Och då med adress till just de möjligheter som digitaliseringen faktiskt ger vad gäller just delaktighet, att möjligheten att ta del utav scenkonst. Och under det här samtalet alldeles nyss som handlade om samverkansmodellen så hade vi också en tydlig framåtrörelse. Birgitta Englin inte minst talade om den här upplösningen mellan att uppleva och att delta själv, deltagandet, civilsamhällets allt större framtida roll i kulturen, konsten, kulturen, scenkonsten. Och det här är ju alldeles utmärkt, tycker jag, krattat för fortsättningen här. Den här programpunkten heter Scenkonsten och omvärlden. Jag tänkte på det när jag åkte hit. Jag satt på tåget hit och så lyssnade jag på Spotify. Och Spotify har all musik, mer än jag någonsin skulle kunna ha drömt om för 5 år sedan att fylla min bokhylla med hemma. Jag kan lyssna på precis vad som helst, när som helst. Och igår kväll så tittade jag på ett program på SVT Play som jag hade missat, och här på morgonen så sist av alla, tror jag, så tittade jag i mobilen på det här YouTube-klippet på den kanadensiska, tror jag, astronauten på väg tillbaka till jorden som gör en version av Bowies Space Oddity. Jag vet inte om ni har sett den. Ombord på rymdstationen. Och det är ju verkligen, jag menar, den här utsuddandet av plattformar. Det finns inga gränser längre för när och var och hur man kan ta del av i princip vad som helst. Vad är en institution? Är det här en institution idag och hur ser den ut imorgon i så fall? Och vi har nu 3 stycken talare som ska tala om scenkonsten och omvärlden, scenkonsten och framtiden. Först skulle jag då vilja säga välkommen hit till Douglas Sonntag, som alltså är chef för avdelningen på det som heter National Endowment for the Arts i Washington DC. Han är chef för scenkonstavdelningen och specifikt inriktad på dans. Och efter Douglas så kommer vi att lyssna på Andreas Linnet Jessen som är rådgivare. Han kommer från Center för Kultur och Upplevelseekonomi i Roskilde i Danmark. Det här är ett center som drivs i samarbete mellan danska kulturministeriet och motsvarigheten till näringsdepartementet. Så det handlar alltså om kreativa näringar. Och så slutligen kommer Jan Björinge, tidigare stadsdirektör i Umeå som nu är kulturhuvudstadsdirektör, alltså leder arbetet inför 2014 när Umeå är Europas kulturhuvudstad. De här 3 ska vi nu lyssna på i tur och ordning och sen avslutar vi förhoppningsvis med ett litet gemensamt samtal. Och detta kommer naturligtvis att ske på engelska rakt igenom så att vi kan förhoppningsvis mötas här i lite reflektioner och frågor. Alla 3, en dansk, svensk, amerikansk union kan vi säga. So please welcome Douglas Sonntag from Washington DC.
Thank you, Thord, for that lovely introduction. It's great to be here representing the United States and my agency at the branch conference here in Karlstad. It's my first trip to Sweden, and I am in love with your country. I hope it won't be my last trip. I'd also like to thank the Swedish Performing Arts for offering me the opportunity to speak with you today. I would also like to thank Anna Cocorio and Karina Stenlund for making the arrangements that brought me here today. I'd also like to extend greetings from my colleagues in the arts in Washington, D.C. and across the United States to those hardworking arts administrators and artists that are here today. I'd like to give you some background on the agency that I work for, which is the National Endowment for the Arts. It's a federal agency headquartered in Washington, D.C. The Arts Endowment began its work in 1966, and since that time has helped to foster the growth of all the arts across the United States. I would also like to give you my perspective on the current state of the performing arts in my country. The challenges that performing arts face today are formidable as our societies are changing at such a rapid pace and in such unpredictable ways. How then can theater, dance, opera, and symphonic music remain as core and critical tenets of civic life? Indeed, how do the live performing arts that are time-based arts, that require audiences to buy a ticket, gather in a common space for a specific amount of time, how do they remain relevant in a world that is increasingly nonlinear and individualized? Are the arts a common meal, or is it dinner for one? There are a number of issues that the performing arts organizations are grappling with in the United States. Here are those that I think are the most important: the changing demographics of American society, racial and cultural diversity in arts organization, among artists, administrators, and governing boards, the opportunities and challenges that are presented by the uses of technology that is coming at an ever faster pace, and the changing expectations and desires of audiences of today and tomorrow. But before I explore how arts organizations in the United States are responding to these challenges, I think it would be helpful to give you a brief background on how arts and culture are supported financially in the United States. One of the first things to understand about my country is that we have a very decentralized system of support. There is no Ministry of Culture, and there is no official cultural policy. The National Endowment for the Arts, although it is a federal government agency, is not a Ministry of Culture. Rather, it is a funding agency that has a unique place in American culture as a national resource on the state of the arts in all disciplines and for the nation. At the National Endowment for the Arts, I serve as the Director of Dance as well as head of the Performing Arts Division, which also includes music, theater, jazz, musical theater, and opera. The Performing Arts Division receives over 2,000 requests for support from arts organizations in all 50 states of the United States, as well as six special jurisdictions, of which Washington, D.C., where I live, is the most prominent. To adjudicate those applications, we assemble panels of experts that make recommendations on which of those applications are the most worthy in terms of financial support, based on their artistic excellence and their artistic merit. Panel members are geographically and racially diverse and represent a variety of aesthetics and backgrounds. Each set of applications that are reviewed acts as a snapshot of an artistic discipline. So from my vantage point in Washington, D.C., I am able to discern the health of the dance field from the state of its finances to trends that are happening artistically. This information allows the Arts Endowment to act as a resource for the arts, to highlight issues of importance, and to disseminate knowledge and best practice around the country. The United States has created a uniquely hybrid system of how it funds the arts, and it comes in three parts. The first part is direct public funding from federal agencies, charged with the arts portfolio. These include the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Those are the three cultural agencies. But there's also direct federal support for other arts institutions, notably the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is our public television and radio service, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Museums, and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, which recently presented the Nordic Cool Festival Arts of Scandinavia, which was a huge hit in Washington, by the way. Direct public funding is also to be found on the regional level, where the Arts Endowment has partnered with the arts councils of the 50 states to create 6 regional organizations that help in such projects as touring of arts around the country. So there are 6 of those organizations. There are also arts councils or offices of arts and culture, offices of often now it's including creative economy and tourism in their portfolio. Every state has one of those councils, and in the aggregate, the budgets of the state arts councils contribute an additional $300 million to arts funding in the United States. Also, on the local level, there is direct support. Many cities and counties in the United States have local arts councils to serve their communities and their artists. The second part of the funding construct comes through other public funding, direct grants in the budget of the National Park Service, for instance, support cultural programming in the national parks. The Department of State has a number of projects in which they employ artists as ambassadors of American culture going abroad. Right now, we are in the 3rd year of an initiative with the State Department called Dance Motion USA, where they are sending dance companies into very specific and targeted areas of the world that the State Department wants to help initiate into American art. The third part of the art support structure is private. This is giving from individuals, corporations, and foundations. Since 1917, the United States tax code has had provisions that create incentives for individuals and corporations to make contributions to charitable and educational institutions such as theaters, dance companies, orchestras, and museums. The tax code is broad in its reach in the United States, but part of what it has done is carved out a class of organizations that are exempted from paying income tax. These tax-exempt organizations are known as nonprofit organizations. In addition to arts organizations, they include churches, schools, social charities, and hospitals. What this funding structure creates is a very decentralized and indirect cultural policy that moves almost all decision-making to the local level. It can even move it to the individual level. A contribution to a cultural organization can be a very private and personal decision in the United States, and that is where some of the decision-making happens. If a person simply decides they can't live without art, they can make a contribution to help it survive. In addition to the way the United States funds the arts and the nonprofit sector is also influenced by legislation that affects the for-profit sector of American culture, that includes movies, popular music, radio and television, and amusement parks. This legislation may cover copyright, workplace safety, compliance with prevailing compensation, or even the cost of using the postal service. So that is a brief look at the financial context in which performing arts organizations make work, perform, and attract audiences in the United States. Now let me get back to some of the changes and challenges and opportunities those organizations face and how they are responding and what is working and what is not. The first challenges facing all sectors of American society is the changing demographics of our population. Americans like to say that we are a nation of immigrants. From all corners of the globe, people have come to the United States with their hopes and their dreams, but also with their food, music, and dances. Out of this tapestries of people has emerged a unique culture. At least that's what we like to believe. The reality can be a little more complicated. For most of the past 200 years, the United States was essentially a New World version of Western Europe. The dominant culture created its cultural and civic institutions based on European models, and that included its artistic endeavors. The mark of any city that had aspirations to higher status was always the presence of a museum of fine arts, a symphony orchestra, an opera house, a ballet company, and a theater company. However, what we are seeing in the United States, and we have become to refer to those specific art forms as legacy arts. So the legacy arts of theater, symphonic music, opera, ballet, and so on are declining in terms of audiences. The Arts Endowment has a research office that combines data generated from other government agencies to prepare a survey of public participation in the arts, and nearly all traditional performing arts appear to be in trouble. The survey of public participation in the arts noted that audiences are getting smaller and they're getting older for the legacy arts. What has happened to audiences for the performing arts? And are they really disappearing, or are they finding their cultural experiences in different ways? The survey of public participation in the arts was issued as a report a few years ago, and it became immediately controversial because the methodology behind it was based on the fact that it's a running 25-year survey that began 25 years ago. The questions that were asked have only been changed once in the last, one time in that 25-year period, mostly because the people at the census wanted to keep consistency within years so that they could follow trend lines. But what became very clear was that they were no longer asking the right questions. They were asking questions that were developed in the middle of the last century and didn't necessarily relate to what audiences were doing in this century. So we're back looking at what is really happening to audiences and where they've gone to. As I said previously, the United States is a nation of immigrants, and for many years the source of that immigration was from Europe. Now, however, the demographic makeup in the United States is changing faster than ever, with the majority of the nation's new citizens coming from Mexico, Central and South America, Africa, and Asia. Within the next 10 years, the United States will be a majority-minority nation, with no single ethnic group able to sit as the dominant culture. Assimilation into a common set of cultural and civic values will be a different process going forward than that we've had in previous centuries. In my own primary area of dance, the diversity in the United States is striking. The Arts Endowment funds ballet, modern dance, postmodern dance, performance art, site-specific dance, aerial dance troupes, tap dance, and a host of other forms. However, we also fund dance traditions such as capoeira from Brazil, classical dance forms from India, China, Japan, and the Philippines, carnival dances from the Caribbean, clogging and step dance from Ireland, traditional dances from all parts of Africa, Cambodia, and the Balkans, as well as Mexico, and our own Native American dances, of which there are many. When I'm asked to describe American dance, the only word I can use is that it's encyclopedic. There are almost no forms or traditions that are practiced in the world today that cannot be found in the United States. Historically, American dance has had a full and rich continuum like so much of American culture is balanced uneasily between art and commerce, high art and popular art, subtlety and high-octane spectacle. River dance, stomp, tap dogs, the Rockettes, Las Vegas Revues, and solid gold dancers, aerobics, and cheerleading are integral to the system that also supports the nation's great ballet companies, its creative modern companies, and all the artists that have found a haven within the broad and essentially undefinable world of American dance. To illustrate this sort of tension between the for-profit and non-profit world in the United States, in my job, I like to think of New York City as sort of our shining jewel of a dance capital. New York City thinks it's the dance capital of the world, and I know you could argue with that, but New York thinks it's the dance capital of the world. And so that's when people talk about American dance, they think, oh, New York City Ballet, Martha Graham, Paul Taylor, Merce Cunningham. But one of the things as a government agency we have done is look to see where dancers and artists are employed. And we have found that indeed the largest number of nonprofit dancers are employed in New York City. The largest number of employed dancers in any form are actually in the state of Nevada because of the work offered by the casinos. So you have the New York City Ballet on one hand, and the newest show at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Both important, but it's a very different set of values, and it's a different world that they illustrate. The result of all of this is a very rich dance culture, but not one that's necessarily creating an audience for traditional concert dance. The same tension, the same sort of financial structures, the same sort of difference between for and not for profit is happening in our music scene and our theater scene as well. And when I speak of diversity in dance styles and cultures, I must also address having racial diversity within the performing, administrative, and governing ranks of performing arts organizations. As we are about to become a nation of many minorities, we need to ask why public dollars should support any organization that does not reflect the demographics of its citizenry. It is hard to build an audience if that audience never sees its stories reflected on the stage. Conversations around cultural equity, racial diversity, and social justice in the performing arts are now permanently embedded in the broader discussion between artists and their communities. Also, as performing arts organizations work within the changing national landscape, their profiles are evolving as well. It is now no longer sufficient to present performances only. Most performing arts organizations have had to expand their portfolios to include education, training, social services, community development, and economic revitalization. Clearly, this is a massive expansion of any art group's core mission of creating and presenting art. Nonetheless, this additional set of services is expected by their home communities, civic leaders, funders, and government agencies. The benefit, of course, is that arts endowments are viewed as being relevant and important for the quality of life and a key civic asset, but it involves a lot of extra work. There is another audience phenomenon that performing arts groups in the United States are grappling with, and that is the role of technology in making art, distributing art, and connecting with audiences. We now have several generations of young people whose life experience has been mediated and defined by their relationship to a screen, whether on their computer, television, gaming console, tablet, or phone. This technologically astute generation is platform agnostic. This generation cares more about content than the delivery system. Movies on a large screen in a theater are no better or worse than movies on your telephone. Indeed, an opera or ballet broadcast from New York or Moscow might be more enjoyable if you're sitting at home watching on your own television. This is an audience for the arts that is omnivorous in its consumption. But there is one huge difference between this generational cohort and arts consumers of previous generations. Typically, they expect their content to be free of charge and available on demand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is a huge hurdle for a business model that relies on ticket sales and subscriptions. Although interestingly, what we're seeing are some developments with social media that allows groups of friends to buy tickets in a specific place in a theater so they can all sit together. So technology is beginning to create some very interesting little pockets of models for how to begin to build an audience within some of those older structures. Performing arts groups must now ask themselves some very hard and costly questions about how to remain relevant and how to preserve the integrity and authenticity of the artistic experience when moving their product onto multiple platforms. Is the communal experience of gathering together in the darkened space of a theater the primary way to reach an audience, or is it only one way, and perhaps not the most important way? Even now, any number of arts organizations are finding their largest audiences outside of their theaters. More people see the productions of the Metropolitan Opera in one single worldwide broadcast than will ever see live productions at its home at Lincoln Center in New York City. It is increasingly apparent that the analog arts must adapt to a digital world in which the challenges and opportunities are vast. Social media strategies are now required for all projects and organizations. Branding of products and organizations is now a reality. And you will see if a robust social media presence can have an astounding effect on reaching new audiences and generally engaging the audiences before the performance, during the performance, and afterwards. So there's it's a much more comprehensive and rich experience if some real thought has gone into how social media can insert itself into that live performing experience. As we have begun to navigate this terrain in the United States, it's become clear that our learning curve is quite steep. New technologies will create new art forms, provide access to new audiences, and expand the reach of many organizations and create new models for business. The Generation X cohort, so literate in technology, is also comfortable with loose boundaries, interdisciplinary work, and malleable definitions. For them, the future of the arts and arts organizations will look very different from the past, from the rigid lines that separated the arts into disciplines. Within the arts, we're already seeing a generational divide between the legacy art forms, which must maintain staffs, rosters of artists, and buildings, and between younger generations that are opting to not go that route, who are building their audiences through technology, maintaining their art through technology, sometimes creating their art with technology, and assembling the pieces for the live performance at the last minute. Some of it is financially driven, some of it is simply the march of time and a generation that is comfortable with the possibilities that technology can provide. In the meantime, our laws and practices are often at odds with the presentation, performance, and preservation and protection of art. Copyright law in the United States is based on assumptions from early in the last century. The relationship between performing arts organizations and the unions that represent performers, stagehands, musicians, and designers are likewise based on how the performing arts worked physically and financially in the 20th century, not the 21st. Much of the debate is driven about the cost and the value of content in its present form. The value of content in a society driven by technology, which is never stops eating content. There's such a demand for it. Everyone now feels like any content they own has value. You could argue about that, but that's where we are. Now people are hanging on through copyright and any other form they can to their archives with the thought that it is a potentially valuable resource. Well, maintaining an archive creates a whole new set of problems for an organization. I do believe in archives, but I think we are going to have to move in the direction where there's more openness and a willingness to share, because not everything is of enormous value. But if you create an archive, you immediately create the need for access to that archive, which means having an archivist. Recently, my agency, which is going to move its office, has met with a representative from our National Archives, who is responsible for all federal government records. At the National Archives right now, they are maintaining records in 17,000 different formats. So you can imagine what the cost of maintaining access to an archive that has 17,000 formats in it would be. I worked for a dance company, and we had beta tapes, VHS tape, half-inch, television, and that was 30 years ago. So you can imagine the cost of creating an archive, creating a migration policy so that it moves forward technologically and remains available. And in the meantime, our copyright law is nowhere near ready to address the issues that are created by the inconsistency between technology, archives, and potential distribution on the World Wide Web. None of these relationships in the past anticipated the global network that would make experiencing the arts on demand in any location on the globe possible. Nor did most artists anticipate the ability to have a worldwide audience and what that relationship should look like. These are exciting days to be working in the performing arts. In the United States, we are living with a dynamic population change, a revolution in technology, and a great unknown landscape on the horizon. Artists are forging ahead, some as pioneers, others determined to reclaim and mine the past. Everything now seems available and possible. While I have outlined a number of challenges and difficulties that American arts organizations are wrestling with, I am not pessimistic. I do think that the creativity of artists and those devoted to supporting them will find solutions to even the most complex problems. I am confident there will always be a need for people to connect with each other, to share a common experience, and to find the nourishment that only profound art can provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Vi kommer att höra mer av Douglas Sonntag om en stund. Han kommer in och vi har ett samtal tillsammans med Andreas, Linnet, Jessen och Björinge. So next in line is Andreas, Linnet, Jessen. Please welcome.
Hello, all of you. Thanks for having me. I was just standing there thinking, how can I work with this stage? Because I'm talking to people who know a lot about staging. So I'm going to try and say that this table is culture and this table is business. And I'm going to place myself here in the middle, because that is where I place my interest. I don't know exactly what to call this place between culture and business, but this is where I work. My educational background is business study. On a private level, I'm a musician, spending a lot of time in rehearsal rooms and on stages. But, of course, I haven't been able to build a business out of playing music. So I had to get a job. And luckily, I got one. In, moving too fast, this place called Center for Culture and Experience Economy in Denmark. Now, that was very lucky for me to find a job there, because this Center for Culture and Experience Economy is also placed right here in the middle between culture and business. It's an independent agency that is partly funded by the Minister of Culture and the Minister of Business. But we are not attached to any of the ministries, so we don't serve the Ministry of Culture and we don't serve the Ministry of Business. We can decide what we want to do, and we can also make proposals to the Ministry of Innovation or Education or etc. So we're no strings attached, except that it's the Ministry of Culture and Business in a joint venture who felt that we should be placed in the world. So we operate on a national level, covering Denmark, which isn't very big, as you know. We also work on a Nordic level. We're very involved in krävs, as Ulrika mentioned earlier, the cross-Nordic platform for developing cultural and creative industries, initiated by the Nordic Council of Ministries. And we're involved on a European level in the European Creative Industries Alliance, where we also have a lot of work. What I'm going to talk about today is this question: the role of the creative or cultural sector in this new economy we have. I don't know whether to call it the creative economy, the experience economy, or what I should call it. But let's just say the new economy. It means post-industrialism, post-materialism, maybe even. And I don't know if you have an image what that means, but we'll get into that. So I asked this slightly provocative question: a victim or a rescuer? And I do that because, from our point of view, in the past 4 or 5 decades in the Nordic countries, we have tended to protect culture, and that's a very wise thing to do, because that way we protect a lot of cultural diversity. The rationale behind this protection of the culture was that we saw that back in the 50s, that the new industrialism and the mass communication, the mass media, was creating a lot of standardization. We didn't want that standardization to affect our rich cultural life. So we said, culture, you go over there, we'll protect you. We'll make sure that there is a very distinct line between what we expect from the cultural sector and business and commercialization. So it created sort of a, I don't know if you would agree, but it sort of tend to victimize the cultural sector, because what happens is that governments run out of money, and then you have the cultural sector over there in the protected box screaming, "Hey, bring us some more money over here." And the governments are going, sorry, we have to cut budgets this year. Maybe next year you get some more. And it sort of becomes this scenery where somebody over here is asking for something. It was mentioned in the prior debate as well. The rescuer that you see on my left, your right, is, instead of asking for something, is offering something. So what does so it's a mental shift, really, to think, well, what does the cultural sector offer our society, and not what should it ask of our society. And of course, a very important thing that the cultural sector offers is democracy, cultural diversity, is richness, cultural richness. It's all the things that we appreciate that are very basically non-economic factors. But let's just go through this one. This is sort of in a very short sense, how the sort of victim paradigm has lived in the Nordic countries. We have to protect the cultural sector before commercial capitalism makes everything into standardized goods. And what we need to do is keep culture and business apart, really. Then something happened during the past 10 or 15 years. We begin to have a shift in economic thinking, also in the Nordic countries. The concept of experience economy was, at least in Denmark, extremely influential when that was introduced about 10 or 12 years ago. So we started thinking about, if we can't compete, if our economy in general can't compete on price, because production costs are so much lower in the East and where else. And we can't really compete on standards anymore, because so many other people can produce the same standards as we can, but cheaper. Then we have to invent something else to compete on. That else could be called added value. That's something that somehow make sense, that this glass of water maybe is worth 100 kroners, and this glass of water is worth 10 kroners. It doesn't make any sense, it's the same. But it makes sense if this glass has a story attached to it, some kind of added value, either about how it was produced or by whom it was produced. For example, if it was a very influential artist or designer or the Queen, I don't know. All those kind of stories makes added value to goods. And you all know that emotions are very, very important in every purchase you make, basically. Even if it's just a carton of milk, really. It involves emotions. So there's a lot of there's a lot of emotional stuff going on in each purchase, and in that sense, the cultural sector can actually play a role as a rescuer, because what the cultural sector is the true expert in is added value. How to create these kind of things that Parin Gimor here mentions: authenticity, true emotional experiences. That's the kind of capacity the cultural sector holds. So, what to do about that then? Well, we've been placed to start closing the gap between culture and business. Not in favor of business, not in favor of culture, but in favor of society. Because by doing so, we will emphasize the role of the cultural sector in our economy. We'll create jobs in the cultural sector because it will be growing instead of declining. And in the wider economy, our businesses will have something to compete on if they start building closer relations to the places where you invent aesthetic value or added value. So one of the things we've done in CKO is that we've tried with a growth fund that was meant to make some experiments with this kind of meeting between culture and business, like going on here. So what we did was we had a bag of money. It was, I believe, 25 million Danish kroners. And we made a call for projects like this, where you have a creative or cultural partner, you have a commercial company. The creative part has some skills, the company has a challenge, you define a project, and you create added value to all partners. So it seemed to work pretty good. I don't want to go into these figures, but it seemed to work pretty good. Although, of course, it was a lot of hard work in these projects. And if they hadn't been publicly supported, we co-funded the projects. We funded half of their budgets. I don't believe many of them would have been realized. So, what it did was it created a lot of knowledge about what happens when you bring together these very different worlds. We wrote a book about it. This one is available online in Danish and English. So, on a Nordic level, one of the things we've been doing is last year we made we made an analysis, I would say, of the current state of Nordic policy making in this sort of cross-sector field of cultural and creative industries. One of the things we found was that a major challenge in the Nordic countries, both in Denmark, Norway, Iceland, Finland, everywhere, is that the cultural sector is very fragmented. It consists of some very strong organizations, but these organizations are actually competing against each other. That, of course, leads back to the first thing, that when you have a lot of organizations that are basically asking for the same money from the government, it means a lot of rivalizing for that money. So this is a challenge if we really want to move into to the creative economy, where the cultural sector as a whole plays an important part. So one thing that could be a tool is for the cultural organizations to start collaborating. And that was a very important theme in the past discussion. And as it was said, it's extremely hard and it takes a lot of effort. But nonetheless, it may be actually necessary. And also, of course, in that sense, the state can play a crucial role in order to facilitate across sector collaboration. For example, through I would say that the Danish government did with the CKO. At least it was one example of trying to make something that wasn't defining music from film, but just said, okay, creative sector. But yeah, we are not the answer to all problem. But and I would say if some of you are lacking a good project for the weekend and you have some entrepreneurial spirit, why not start building Creative Sweden? I don't know. It might help. Why would you do that? Well, from my perspective, because it builds political leverage. If you have 12 different organizations, each screaming at the politicians for the same money, the result is that politicians get uninterested, basically. What could happen is that if the cultural and creative organizations were able to make joint propositions to the political systems, not saying what we want from you, but saying what can we offer you, both on a innovation policy, educational policy, business policy, cultural policy, foreign affairs policy. It involves exports as well. Now that would create some political leverage, but it's not an easy task to do. But this is something that we found out was very important. Being provocative again, instead of asking for more cookies, joint venture and build a bakery. So this is my the final slide I'm going to show you on this. Is we feel it's very important to end this kind of separated policy making. I could have involved also on this slide innovation policy, educational policy, as I also said, foreign affairs, exports policy, and start instead of having those in silos with their own measures and own targets. We should admit or acknowledge that all policy is aiming at building a stronger society. So that means a lot more joint venture on a cross-policy level. I think, was that my time? Oh, yeah.
I'm afraid we're running a bit short of time, so thank you very much.
I'll place these.
Andreas, Linnet, Jessen.
I'll just place these on here and you can take them if you want.
That's very good. And next in line, Jan Björinge.
So, thank you. And Andreas put a question about culture as the victim or the rescuer. And my answer is absolutely the rescuer. In fact, the solution of the crisis we are finding in Europe now. So welcome to Umeå 2014, the European Capital of Culture. And also a special welcome for Douglas, who came first time to Sweden. And for you, I would like to explain Umeå means you and me, and collaboration all across the borders. I would like to elaborate on 7 similarities, or you might call it challenges, between Umeå 2014 as a capital of culture and performing arts institutions. There's a question mark. You can always question. That's the rule of culture. You judge. The first one, Umeå is not yet really that well known as New York. But I think there are also some cultural institutions in Sweden that are not as well known as Metropolitan. So it's a similarity. In fact, when we were candidating to become the European Capital of Culture, this was the map the European part of the jury could see. And they really did not believe there was something north of Stockholm. But we tried to say the twinkling dot, that's us. And we believe everything is possible. And in the end, we won to become the capital of culture. And I think also the performing arts institutions has always, every day, 24 hours to believe everything is possible. One, you could call it an institution that believe everything is possible, is the Ice Hotel in the northern region. Because Umeå, as European Capital of Culture, represents the northern room, and we are the northernmost capital of culture ever in the European Union. And how we got the question from Philip and from Birgitta Englin and from others in the jury, especially the European members of the jury, asking, how could you market Umeå, because no one has heard of it. No one will care that you are the capital of culture. So we went to the Ice Hotel and said, could you help us? Because they have done an amazing job with everything is possible. It's possible to sleep on a nice bed. So we started to say, yeah, let's go marketing in Europe. Let's put a nice hotel in front of the Tour Eiffel or in London. So the theme for European Capital of Culture, the third similarity, is curiosity and passion. And that's what it's all about if you are running a cultural institution. That's a similarity. And in fact, in Umeå, we believe culture is really the driving force for development, for human development and for economic development. Because culture is provocating us. Culture is awakening curiosity, puts us together in meetings, in discussions, and from this oxygen of creativity comes innovations. And that is what also economic growth is about. It's innovations, new products, new services, new designs, and so. The strategy of European Capital of Culture Umeå is co-creation. So we try to co-create everything we are doing. And I believe also for performing arts institutions, co-creation is improving day by day in finding new partners, in co-creation with the audiences, financing, and so on. One example we have done in Umeå in co-creation, 2,600 youngsters in not only Umeå but also in Vancouver, Canada, made an ice hockey musical together with incredible lot of co-creation. There's a lot of things we can do in order to provocate and to create beauty and to create discussions in the public room, in outdoors like this, saying, wow, is this possible? Can we do this? I think also a similarity is that we believe in empowerment. This is what culture is about. Umeå has a strategy for empowerment, starting with the citizens, of course, the audiences, the co-creators. Because when we ask past capitals of culture, what is the legacy 5 years after, 10 years after, 15 years after? The most common answer is something happened to our citizens. The way we look upon ourselves, the way we look upon our possibilities, we got new networks, and we became much more proactive for the future. And then, of course, it's an empowerment of the city, building the attractiveness of the city, and the empowerment of the culture sector as such, because that we believe is the engine of development. And of course, international relations. 6, we all would like to come across, to get attention from new audiences. Douglas talked about this in his introduction, how to find the new audiences and the new co-creators, not only passive audiences. Well, we are going on a marketing tour like a performing art company to 8 countries in Europe in September, October this year to market before the Capital of Culture year. Last, the 7th, similarity. Of course, we believe in culture because of its own beauty, for the meaning of life. For what is the meaning of life without culture? But also as the driving force for development, not only for us as human beings, but for our societies. And we believe we can change the world to the better. We can. And here's some stepstones, landmarks on the way to Capital of Culture in Umeå. Umeå, for us, 2014 is the kickoff for a plan for 2050. We have to have long-term strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan Björinge. Please step forward, Douglas and Andreas. We have a few minutes. So, culture-driven growth. That's sort of the word of the day nowadays, and also the reason of being for Andreas and the institution he works for. Is this also something you didn't really mention this very much in your speech? Is this something you discuss a lot in the States?
Yeah, increasingly it's part of the discussion. At my own agency, we started in the last couple of years an initiative centered around creative placemaking, which fuses real estate and the revitalization of the urban core of many cities with the arts and the transformative power of the arts to make that a reality. And probably one of the best examples of this is the United States has a large 19th century industrial real estate base. We've got a lot of old factories and a lot of old textile mills. And what has happened is a lot of those are being repurposed into cultural spaces. And a very good example of that is in Massachusetts, in a little town called North Adams that was very depressed, it was very poor, it was losing population, it was losing its children. But they had acres and acres of textile factories. And they were repurposed with funds from the private sector and the public sector into, it's called the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Arts. popularly known as Mass Mocha, but it has completely transformed this very depressed little town into a worldwide center for people interested in cutting-edge contemporary art.
So you sound quite positive. You see big possibilities. Do you see
Absolutely.
any negative aspects on it as well?
Well, I think the commerce can sometimes overwhelm the art, and I don't know that that's a good thing or a bad thing right now, but sometimes it happens.
Andreas and Jan, you're of course both also positive. Can you see any dark sides of it?
Yes, definitely. It's a very legitimate concern to the whole debate about if the cultural sector is instrumentalized in order to reach goals that has nothing to do with culture itself. I believe it's a legitimate concern, but I think it's mostly a theoretical concern. At least it's not one that we, on a more practical level, operational level, meet very often.
And a theoretical concern, not a realistic.
In my experience, it's mostly a theoretical concern, but on that theoretical basis, it is very legitimate.
Jan?
Well, in my world, the question is not about transforming an old industrial building to some kind of art building or cultural building. The question is about culture as the oxygen for every citizen and to bring it into all different business sectors. Not working with culture and creativity as a separate sector. It's the oxygen for every sector. And if we succeed to reach every citizen, well, they are employed in every sectors and they will bring new ideas and to develop creativity in all sectors.
One thing we've been discussing today in different panels is the demographic change. That could be the topic for a whole day, I think. You said, Douglas, that there are so many minorities in our society. I say our,
Yes.
because it means Europe and Sweden as well. So why should we finance an institution or a project that is not really reflecting this? Is that really a question that you've been asking yourself? Is it something you discuss within the National Endowment for the Arts?
I think it's a conversation that has gone on for many years and in different ways, and I think the answer ultimately is, and it will be different for different societies and different cultures. But in the United States right now, it's so clear that we are a mongrel culture. We always have been. There are too many influences from other places to say that this is a monoculture, that this is what American culture is, because American culture isn't that. It's different in New York City than it is in Miami, Florida. Los Angeles is its own thing. San Francisco, very different. So there really isn't such a thing as American culture. And I think as such, certainly as a federal agency, we have an obligation to distribute taxpayer dollars on an equitable basis.
But will you reach a point when an institution or whatever will not get any funds if it doesn't really reflect the society?
Right now, one of the big issues is that we have these flagship institutions that have built what one could argue is American culture: the Metropolitan Opera, the Metropolitan Museum, the San Francisco Ballet, the great cultural institutions that were based on European models. As new immigrant groups come along, what they are finding are barriers to getting that funding, simply because we can only fund organizations. They have to have a 3-year history and they have to have tax-exempt status from the Internal Revenue Service. Those are not easy things to attain. So if you're a new immigrant trying to navigate the visa process or find a decent meal or a place that you can afford to rent, you're probably not setting up an organization that is going to be eligible for funding from my agency. So you do have those sort of social inequities that create barriers.
Andreas and Jan, do you
Yeah,
have?
I'll just also make a comment on it. A few years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, there was made a study also in Denmark about how wide the cultural institutions actually had, how wide a reach in the public sphere. And as you probably can guess, it turned out that, for example, the Royal Academy for Arts and Ballet, and they actually read a very narrow part of the of the people. So this is a project called Reach Out, launched by the Ministry of Culture last 2 years ago. Doesn't matter. But it's about how cultural institutions can actually try and say, well, what could we be outside of this house? For example, this opera. What can this opera be outside of these walls? So it's about trying to get out in other parts of society where you don't usually have your touch points and your customers. So, sorry, we shouldn't say customers. We learned before. Sorry, users. So I'll place that over there as well.
Okay, in the pile over there.
Yeah, sorry.
And Jan, how do you reflect the minorities in Umeå within the culture of your city?
Well, in the strategy of Umeå 2014 is cross-border. We don't want to work with children and senior citizens and minority that and minority that. It's the cross-border that's the point. So we don't believe we should especially say, well, we should have a program for that minority. Or everyone should be invited, and not primarily as minority, but as human beings.
Very good. That'll be the last word. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ja, vi närmar oss slutet. Jag säger välkommen upp hit på scenen till Stefan Forsberg. Som alltså, han är ordförande i Svensk Scenkonst. Har vi honom här? Där har vi honom, precis. Då så, varsågod.
Tack så mycket. Alldeles strax så kommer vår VD Ulrika att komma in här för att avsluta stämman, och jag fick en fråga om jag kunde tänka mig att göra en liten reflektion och en sammanfattning av de här dagarna. Förstår ni vilket självmordsuppdrag detta är? Men det är för att citera min mamma och pappa. De sa alltid, det är något fel på pojken. Han har inte vett nog att bli nervös. Så därför så står jag här just nu. Och vi har ju hört ett antal briljanta talare här som har delat med sig av sina erfarenheter under båda dagarna här, och i synnerhet idag. Och jag vet att alla som sitter här i salongen skulle mycket väl kunna göra och bidra på samma sätt. Det är därför vi sitter och har de här jobben som vi har. Vi är bra på att prata. Vi är scenpersonligheter. Vi är övertygande, vi är drivande och vi har starka konstnärliga idéer. Och vi har talat om ord som viktiga. Det har varit ett antal nyckelord. Och jag lyssnade noggrant och några ord fastnade hos mig. Det ena var, vi måste lyssna. Vi måste lyssna på vad som sägs i samhället för att vara fortsatt angelägna. Vi måste reflektera över hur vi skulle kunna få våra verksamheter att integrera med det. Men när vi har lyssnat och när vi har reflekterat så innebär det ingalunda att vi ska rusa iväg och göra precis så. För då kommer nästa del in just i vårat uppdrag, varför vi sitter där vi gör. Vi har en kreativ ådra som har gjort att vi har en expertis, och vi ska tillföra innovativa idéer som ska möta de förväntningar som finns på oss. Och därför måste vi också driva och vi måste planera. Och då kommer ett femte ord in. Då krävs det framförhållning. Det krävs framförhållning för att vi ska kunna förverkliga de drömmar som vi har. Kunna få de artister vi vill jobba med. Vi måste kunna få de pjäsförfattare som vi vill ska skriva, de tonsättare som vi vill ska skriva. För att vi ska kunna genomföra det som vi har tänkt ut. Men det finns också naturligtvis förväntningar på en finansiell framförhållning. Vi vet att det kommer att krävas finansiella resurser för att kunna genomföra det vi har tänkt ut, våra drömprojekt. Men sen tillstår ju då nästa problem. Om det här bara vore att vi fick reagera själva, vi fick göra precis själva vad vi önskade, då vore det inga problem. Men vi sitter ju alla i regioner, i en samverkan med många. Vi ser ur ett nationellt, lokalt eller ett regionalt perspektiv. Men vi har återigen en styrka till. Vi är experter på just vår region. Vi sitter med taxikartan i knät. Vi känner varenda gränd och varenda bakgata. Vi kan nå vart vi vill. Problemet är bara att hitta en gemensamt mål. Och det är där som Svensk Scenkonst som branschorganisation kommer in. Det är vårt jobb att försöka förse er med så mycket fakta och omvärldsanalys som möjligt, både ur ett nationellt perspektiv och ett internationellt perspektiv. Att titta ut, vart är vi på väg? Hur kan vi serva er med underlag? För återigen, vår briljans med ord gör att om vi har rätt fakta så kan vi ta befälet över målriktningen. Vi kan briljera och jag anser att svensk scenkonst måste bli starkare på att ta befälet i många frågor. Vi reagerar allt för ofta och reflekterar ofta på sånt som har hänt. Jag tror vi måste ta tag i många viktiga frågor, utvalda frågor där vi ska kunna ta befälet och hamna i förarsätet. Det ser jag som en väldigt viktig del för de kommande årens arbete inom svensk scenkonst. Och när vi identifierar problem, betonghinder, vägen är avspärrad, ja då är det vår uppgift som branschorganisation att tillsammans med våra motparter sätta oss ner och diskutera hur kan vi lyfta undan det här betongfundamentet så att ni kan köra i egen takt. Vissa långsamt medan vissa vill trycka gasen i botten. Det är valfritt. Men uppdraget är att skapa så öppna och flexibla möjligheter för er att fullgöra uppdragen. Så ser jag på svensk scenkonsts uppgift de kommande åren. Jag fick också en fråga, men kommer svensk scenkonst att vara liksom relevant i framtiden? Kommer det verkligen finnas ett behov? Ja, det vet jag att det kommer att göra. För det finns en faktor som ingen av oss rår på. Och vi är alla unika. Det finns inte en enda människa på denna planet som är exakt likadan. Och vi kan inte styra över en sak och det är lust. Det är lust att utveckla någonting vi är intresserade av. Lusten att sjunga och spela och dansa. Vissa gör det bara för att det är roligt som ett allmänt intresse. Men vissa har en extrem talang för det. Om man älskar att sjunga och spela och man har en väldig talang, de kommer att kräva jag vill utbilda mig inom det här området. Och älskar man att dansa och sjunga, är väldigt talangfull och har gått ut en högkvalitativ utbildning, då kommer man ut på en arbetsmarknad och gör anspråk på jobb. Och voilà, där står vi. Framtiden svensk scenkonst, jag ser den som väldigt ljus. Det finns oerhört många frågetecken att utreda, många spännande frågor, men jag ser fram emot att tillsammans med er jobba med det de närmaste åren. Och jag hoppas ni har haft trevliga dagar här och att vi ses med ny sprängkraft nästa år. Tack!
Tack så jättemycket Stefan. Ja, vilken dag ska jag säga. För att försöka summera den jättekort bara måste vi ändå säga hur tillfredsställande det är att vi fick klart avtal med Musikerförbundet idag. Men jag skulle vilja säga här bara tack till ett antal personer, till moderatorerna som har gjort ett enastående arbete, till alla panelister som har varit frikostiga med tankar och idéer, till kanslisterna, det vill säga alla från Svensk Scenkonst som har möjliggjort det här. Det är ett jättemycket arbete som ligger bakom det. Tack till publiken såklart som har varit en förutsättning för att vi skulle göra det överhuvudtaget. Men också Värmland Opera för att allting fungerade och att tekniken fungerade mer än fungerade. Den var helt knockout. Och det är vi inte så bortskämda med. Men det har varit helt underbart att jobba tillsammans här och jätteroligt. Och, i en slags total upplevelse här just nu. Så om jag skulle summera någonting som jag tar med mig så är det ju mycket av det som Stefan också pratade om, vår framtida uppgift, fortsatta framtida uppgifter. Jag tycker att vi har börjat leverera någonting och jag är stolt över de rapporter som vi har tagit fram som ju faktiskt är ett embryo till att göra det vi behöver göra. Vilket vi pratade om också under panelen om runt kultursamverkansmodellen, det vill säga att synliggöra och också kommunicera det vi tar fram, institutionernas värde, det inneboende värdet och inte bara där, vad gör vi, en slags redovisning, utan verkligen bygga någonting från det. Så det tar jag med mig från den här dagen.